want to thank everybody for tuning in to another episode of You and the Law podcast. I am one of the co-hosts of the show, Virgil Green, and as always, I got to introduce the brother who sits next to me every Thursday afternoon, who goes by the name of Chief Swaggy. Swaggy one, the ultimate beast.
Well, it's not afternoon, it's evening.
Evening.
Daylight savings time. It's darker earlier, so
Have you
how you
got used
doing?
to the change in time yet, man?
Absolutely, man. When you're a beast, you know
Oh, so when you're a beast,
you just adapt.
you just adapt to the flow, huh?
Absolutely.
Oh, all right, man. All right. Well, hey, man. Hey, we're again. We want to thank everybody for tuning in to the podcast. We want to thank those who are tuning in on our YouTube, You and the Law podcast on YouTube, and our Facebook, You and the Law on Facebook, and our LinkedIn. So once again, thank you. We got another informative topic we're going to be talking about tonight. And so if you got any questions, comments, put them in the chat. We definitely want to hear from you. And so, Keith, man, tonight we're going to be talking about, let me pull up what we're, let me talking about why are more officers facing prosecution? We've seen more cases where if it's 4 years or 2 years, police officers are being convicted of these crimes of mainly involving shooting of unarmed individuals, mainly black men and black women. And we didn't see this some 20 years ago, Keith. I think there's probably a lot of young people who don't even remember what happened to Rodney King, but in that whole situation where you had multiple police officers who were, I think on the state side, they wasn't found guilty, but on the federal side, I think one or two may have been convicted. Kind of what we, just like what we saw in Memphis with the death and the murder of Tyreek Nichols. Is that right?
Tyree.
Yeah. And where 5 officers were charged and now they've been convicted. So again, we just want to, dive into this conversation as to why are more police officers facing prosecution. And because for these families, they're finally finding some closure related to some of these incidents, Keith.
I think there's multiple reasons, but I think the actual social media platforms and the video that's being captured, whether it's body cams or whether it's cell phone footage.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that the cases are being looked at more thoroughly. Um, it's not. It has gone past the point of I fear for my life, for my safety. It's being able to articulate, well, what made you feel fear for your life or safety? So officers
Yeah.
are, I think now they are, they're focused more on de-escalation and not utilizing a firearm. And I think that has been those have been some of the things that have gotten us to this point. Juries are looking now to see, well, were there other options?
Yeah.
Did that officer put himself or herself in that position to have to utilize deadly force? So I think these cases are being scrutinized even more than they ever have before. And then the outcry from the communities regarding, why does it appear that officers are getting away with this? Whether they are or not, that's a perception.
Yeah.
I just think that there's multiple things, Virgil, and to the audience that has played into what we're seeing. Case in point, let's talk about in 1973. Let's talk about Darrell Kane.
Yeah.
Darrell Kane was one of the first officers in Dallas County to ever be indicted and convicted and confined for homicide, the homicide of Santos Rodriguez. Then fast forward to Amber Geiger. Although there was no video of what happened, the evidence and the testimony um, from Amber Geiger herself, who basically said, I was shooting to kill, not shooting to injure. So I think people are paying a lot closer to the words of officers and,
Hmm.
during these testimonies, expert witnesses and things like that. So I think they're figuring out, or not figuring out, but they are examining the cases even more.
More different. So, Keith, do you think after what we saw with George Floyd, what's been over 4 years now, do you think that that has had something to do with how these cases are being presented by prosecutors and how the jurors are looking at all of this evidence? I mean, initially, it has to start with a prosecutor
Yeah,
uh, to charge these officers with this case. And as we saw with, we've seen what happened with Michael Brown and Ferguson. We
yeah,
saw what happened um, with Eric Garner. A lot of those cases did not even reach into the courtroom, and now we're seeing a lot more of these cases finding a way into the courtroom, especially after George Floyd, where you're finding more prosecutors who are they're waiting on the facts, but they're also taking these steps uh, to bring charges much more quicker.
yeah. Whereas I think that with the whole change in the policing system when it comes to training and the large focus on de-escalation, the CIT training, crisis intervention training, using in the increase in less lethal resources. I think that, as I've mentioned earlier, I do believe that citizens, juries, the district attorneys and things are examining and they're looking to see if that was the last resort. They're
Hmm.
looking to see if everything else had been. So did an officer go from 0 to 60?
Yeah.
Why didn't they go from 0 to 20? Why didn't they go from 0 to 25? And if they did, were they able to justify? So yeah, there was no other option for this officer. I think that some of these shootings have been questionable, where you weren't able to determine if it was intentionally
Justified.
horrendous or
Yeah.
justified. I think that's
Yeah.
what, or justified or not justified. I think there was some inconclusiveness there.
Hmm.
But I think that's what we're seeing. I just think we're seeing more of a outcry from the community that believes that officers have not been scrutinized. So I think you're seeing that now.
Well, you got that. The aspect of it also, Keith, is that it's been a long-standing practice that there's that you're immune. There's a lot of immunity from being charged, and
What whether it's a long-standing practice or perception, the fact of the matter is people believe that. This is what they say. They don't hear about. But I would say that even if officers haven't been prosecuted, indicted, or jailed for homicides, there's officers, or for murder, or manslaughter, whatever.
mhm,
Daily there are officers that are um, tried and convicted for other crimes.
mhm.
But there's not a crime, if you think about it, that's more prevalent than someone's death. And so,
Yeah,
of course,
especially when they're unarmed. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So especially that's what brings it. So it is going to cause. Because guess what? The district attorney, what, is an elected position. They
It
have to
is.
get it right. Now,
Yeah.
do some feel that there's a lot of pressure on them to to um, to make these decisions, to indict, whatever? Don't know. Do they think it's a lot more pressure on them to explore the case even further? Don't know. But
Hmm.
but it is occurring. Um, and because I can tell you right now, there have been some judges throughout the nation in the past, and I'm talking 30 years ago, that had said that A police officer will not be tried or indicted unless they really want to. They knew how to get one indicted and how not to get that. That was said. That was a known fact by a prominent judge in Tarrant County. And so, if I want one indicted, we'll get them indicted.
Yeah.
So it comes down to, it's just more the fact now people know what to look for. They know what questions to ask. It is, when you're in that elected position, they got to get it right. Whether they're elected or not, they've got to get it right. But I just think that now we just have more, there's more higher expectations for officers to be held accountable.
Yeah. Well, Keith, in one of these, an incident that took place in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, I want to play this clip that shows this officer who shot into a car. And I think, we may have even talked about this.
Balch Springs.
Yeah, on a previous podcast where there was an incident.
Balch Springs, Texas.
Yeah, kind of set this up for our listeners tonight. Police officers were called to a home, and there was a graduation party, if I recall.
It was just a large party of juveniles. Yeah.
And at some point, somebody started shooting. Kids started scattering everywhere. Police were already there, and this officer ordered a vehicle to stop that had 5 individuals in it, and he fired into that car as they were driving away. So, Keith, I want to play this video, and on the other side of that, we'll talk about what led up, how this officer ended up being charged and now has been convicted.
Okay.
We find the defendant guilty of murder.
A former Texas police officer is now a convicted murderer. Facing the possibility of life behind bars, a jury found Roy Oliver guilty in the death of 15-year-old Jordan Edwards. In court, the young victim's family overwhelmed by the verdict.
It's been a long time, a hard year. I'm just really happy.
64, we're gonna be out.
The fatal shooting last year was captured on body cameras worn by Oliver and his partner. They were clearing a house party in a Dallas suburb when gunfire rang out. As panic ensued, high school students fled the scene on foot and in cars. Oliver's partner ordered a vehicle with 5 black teenagers to stop.
Hey, stop that car!
As the car pulled away, Oliver fired 5 times. Jordan Edwards, a passenger, was shot in the back of the head. Oliver told the jury he thought his partner was in danger.
He was trying to hit you.
But that officer testified he never feared for his life.
It's just a very gut-wrenching experience. Words cannot describe that.
The victim's family attorney says this is a win for more than just one family.
He don't ever want another parent, another father to have to go through what this family has had to deal with.
A teenager attending a house party gunned down by police. And now the former officer who pulled the trigger on the wrong side of the law.
After hearing from family, friends, and teachers who knew Jordan Edwards, the jury must now decide how much prison time Roy Oliver should face. Life in prison is a...
Keith, that's just one of several other videos I want to show tonight. But the one thing that stuck out to me, even watching this video again, and we talked about it before, was the fact that something we hear common is that either you fear for your safety or you fear for your partner's safety. And his partner said at no time did he ever fear for his safety.
Which I commend him for saying that.
For saying that. Because, again, oftentimes you see officers going along with each other and there's that blue line and you don't want to cross that line. And this officer told the jury he never feared for his safety or of his life.
So just a little caveat on this too, Virgil. Balch Springs is in southern Dallas, southeast Dallas County. Small bedroom community, not a very large police department. But the caveat to this is, so that occurred, I believe, on a Saturday night.
Yeah.
early Sunday morning.
Yeah. It's a weekend.
Later that day, the police chief did a press conference and basically said the exact same thing that the officer said, that the officer feared for his life. He heard gunfire, thought he had been shot at, feared for his life, and started shooting. This is what he said.
Yeah.
Approximately 24 hours later, the chief had to go back and retract that statement and present new information to the community that the officer did not fear for his life, and this officer had no reason to shoot. So the chief had not watched the video,
Yeah.
prior to making that
Statement.
that initial press conference.
Yeah.
Which is not is not a smart thing to do, and it's that's something that is very difficult to overcome.
You lose a lot of credibility.
You do.
Yeah.
And then fast forward, so we know that occurred and then in 2020 in Wolf City, Texas, which is in East Texas, not far from where I went to school, an officer killed a young black man. Jonathan Price was the young man. Sean Lucas was the officer. 22-year-old officer, first police job, went to a disturbance at a local retail store. Apparently, Jonathan was trying to break up a domestic. He was basically trying to intervene. Lucas came up, didn't do any investigation, starts talking to Jonathan. Words are exchanged. Jonathan, who was a physically fit young man, something was said. The officer tased him. The taser apparently did not take effect. This is what the officer said, and the video shows that the taser was used. I guess it did not affect Jonathan the way that the officer thought it should. Jonathan is trying to explain in some way, somehow, at some point, the officer shot and killed Jonathan. He was arrested. As a matter of fact, I think he remained in jail. That officer remained in jail for, I know, at least a year and a half. But he was found not guilty based on the fact that he felt that the taser was ineffective, which caused Jonathan to not comply with his orders and walk toward him in which he felt was a threatening manner. When you look at that video, I didn't see that, but the jury found him not guilty. Of that.
Yeah.
So,
once again, he was unarmed. He had no weapon.
He was unarmed. And so, when I look at that, I look at a young man that's trying to tell his side of the story. He's getting frustrated because the officer's not listening to him. And then it comes down to, we have a young man who's deceased.
Yeah.
And so, it all depends on what that jury sees, how they see it, what they believe, how the evidence is presented. But you have one case, two cases where young black men are dead or killed. One is convicted, one is not convicted.
Yeah. Keith, and as you're talking about that, I watched a video earlier that I was going to try to get on the podcast, and I think it's something that we will talk about on another podcast. I don't know if you've seen this video in Bowie, where the police officer noticed a vehicle with his flashers on. He turned around, and as he approached the vehicle, there was a black gentleman walking up to the vehicle, and he asked that person, "Do you know the person in the vehicle?" The guy said, "She's giving me a ride to the hospital." He immediately pulls out his weapon and shoots this individual. I don't know if you've seen that.
I have not.
It happened about a week, maybe 2 weeks ago. The lady in the vehicle, she gets out, screaming, "Why did you do that?" Now, the officer said he was reaching for a weapon. He never had a weapon. And the guy said, "I don't have a weapon." He had a hat. He had went to retrieve a hat. And so it's going to be interesting to see how, and this guy was a sergeant, and he was immediately start, "Hey, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." But it kind of goes back to what we talked about last week with our guest, Dr. Campion, about the psychological aspect of what men and women go through. Are they fit to be a police officer?
Yeah.
And the video that we just saw with the officer in the Dallas Fort Worth area, it makes you wonder. It makes you ask, what was his psychological how was that test done? Was it done?
Yeah.
Because there are some signs that you see, and it was the conversation we had with Dr. Campion last week was spot on, because it just answered so many questions, and it gave an insight into what a trained medical profession person sees when they're evaluating someone.
Well, Virgil, let me say this. It's very interesting, that the show that we had last week, but it comes down to the fact of the matter. We're being taught to, if a vehicle is driving away from, we don't, and there's policy that says you will not shoot at a moving car, you will not shoot into a car.
Mm-hmm.
There's some parts of it that basically says, unless this is your last option. So you got a car, you hear gunshots, which means he had the trigger, his finger on the trigger. When you have your finger on the trigger of a gun, you know that is a probability, not possibility. With your finger on the gun, there's a probability that weapon is going to discharge.
Yeah.
But let's back up to Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Crutchfield.
Was it Betty Ramsey?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Betty Ramsey was the officer.
Yeah.
We know for a fact that Betty Ramsey got away with murder. There's no doubt in my mind. The
fact that she wants to go around the country talking about it.
Right. We know for a fact that Betty Ramsey had her finger on the trigger, and her partner had a taser, which we do teach less lethal and covered by lethal is probably you want to use the less lethal. But we all know what happened is when she heard that taser being deployed, it caused her to pull her trigger. Her hand was already on the trigger, so it startled her to the point pull the trigger. Was she intending on killing this Crutchfield? I don't think so. But I think that her actions were definitely, if nothing else, reckless. I don't think it was any intention, but I think it was reckless. And so, it goes to the jury. And this is what's interesting about that case. So the jury finds her not guilty, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then the foreman of the jury writes a letter to the judge basically saying she should never have been hired. She was reckless. The report shows that she was reckless in fear. I don't see how she became a police officer. She doesn't need to be a police officer in the future and things like that. So it comes down to, wow, you said she's not guilty, but you just said she's reckless.
Yeah.
You just said she's reckless. So, you can't have it both ways. If you're recklessness is not a defense to prosecution.
Yeah.
And so, it comes down to we're seeing this more, but there's still those cases that people have questions about. Yeah. And I don't think you'll ever have very many families whose loved one was shot by an officer, killed by an officer.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to find that justifiable. I don't think you're going to have. You're not going to have. No, you're going to have those based on the circumstances where if this person was violent toward the family member or something like that. But it's very difficult to explain to someone, a family who's grieving, that that member was killed and they had no weapon.
Yeah.
Now we understand that that's possible. That somebody, just because someone doesn't have a weapon, it doesn't mean they can't harm you. But to the average citizen, That's very difficult. And we can't try to insult people's intelligence by trying to make them believe. All we can do is what we do in the investigation, present the information to the grand jury, and it moves from that point. But we can't try to, we try to force, we didn't, you got to believe us, you got to believe us.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have to believe you. All you have to do is do the right thing. And the right thing in the investigation part, and that's all you can do.
Yeah. Well, Keith, as you were talking about the incident that happened in Tulsa in 2016, her name was Betty Jo Shelby.
Shelby. Yeah, I'm sorry
if
I called the wrong
name.
Betty Shelby.
Yeah. Just want to. Yeah. And that incident took place in 2016 with Terrence Crutcher. And so once again, in that shooting, there were some things, even the Tulsa helicopter pilot made some comments about, that's a big guy or something like that.
He's a bad guy.
Yeah, he's a bad guy. And, she shoots and kills him. She not convicted. And so then you have, fast forward to a similar, well, not a similar incident, but what took place in the Minneapolis area in a suburb city in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, where a young man, Dante Wright, was killed by a white female officer. And she thought she had pulled out her taser, but she pulled out her weapon and she shot and killed him.
Yeah.
And she was convicted.
Which I believe too, that there was no intention there. I think it was reckless.
It was, and she, I think, what did she do? I think she did maybe 3 years of a 5-year sentence or something like that.
Oh, she did year and a half, maybe 2.
Okay.
Years,
all right.
Yeah, maybe 2.
And the reason I bring her up, because what happened with her and what happened with Betty Jo Shelby in Tulsa, you have these two women who have been almost there's been a justification for the murders that they committed. And now they're out here going across the country speaking to other law enforcement officers about what they went through. And some are saying that this is helping officers understand what this officer went through. I just don't see it in the fact that you're doing this and you're getting paid to you're getting paid to do that, and you're speaking about a person that you took their life away, and you were found, at least the officer in Minnesota was found guilty, but Betty Jo Shelby was not found guilty. So I don't know. There's just some mixed opinions about that, Keith.
Well, one of them, I was asked when I was in Oklahoma to allow Shelby to come and speak at the facilities where I was chief, and my first question to the individuals who came to me were, "You got to be out of your mind. You got to be out of your mind. Me bringing someone here." I said, because that is just like, and like I said, intentional, no, reckless, but somebody's life was taken.
Yeah.
And so no matter if it was by accident or whatever, you're not going to convince people. And then the insult to injury is to bring them in to talk about the situation, which is going to make some people believe that they're boasting about it. Now, whether they're boasting or not, I just think that that's not a good. I think there's other ways that you could help, or other ways that you could bring your message. But to actually go and you're getting money for this, and you're being touted, you're being seen as a hero.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing that concerns the communities, and that's why there's a lot of anger regarding these type of situations when individuals are, found not guilty.
Yep.
I will tell you that, Amber Geiger came up for parole,
which was denied. Yeah,
it was denied, and she's done 5 years. She's done 5 years. It's hard to believe that
It's
incident
been
happened
5 years ago.
5 years, but it's been 5 years. And
Yeah.
in the state of Texas, on a murder charge, especially with a weapon, you have to serve at least a half of your sentence. She was sentenced to 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
You have to serve at least 5 before you're eligible for parole. And to the audience out there, eligible for parole does not automatically mean you're getting parole. That means that you are eligible to go before the parole board.
Correct.
Parole board has to make a decision. So she's not eligible to go back before the parole board for 2 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So they believe that she's still a danger to the community. Now, I don't know what type of rehabilitation is going on, but they basically say 5 years. You served 5, we get it. You're trying to improve and be a better person, but we're just not going to do it. So,
yeah. Hey, Keith, I want to remind those who are just now tuning into tonight's podcast. Tonight's topic is, why are more police officers facing prosecution? Whether that be from, body-worn cameras, whether that be from civilians who are recording these incidents, whether that be from jurors who are looking at all the evidence, making a very an opinion based on the evidence that has been presented to them. So, Keith, I want to show this next video. It comes out of Ohio, where an officer was just recently convicted of an incident that took place 4 years ago.
Virgil,
go ahead.
Before you go to it, I do want to share with the audience. I just think that there is a more heightened awareness of what's going on, and I think that there are prosecutors who don't want the community to think that you get a walk when you're an officer.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that no matter what you do, because our profession has, for years been known to be able to get away with things.
Yeah.
And I just think now you just have the population is asking more questions.
Yeah.
And I think the generation does more research. I think that the generation, the newest generation that we have, of prosecutors and things, they do more research. The scientific process is a lot more. It helps.
Yeah,
it's used a lot more. So I just think that there's just more of a responsibility to answer the questions of the community when this type of thing happens.
Yeah. Well, Keith, we got a comment in the chat from Brent, who is watching and listening on LinkedIn. And Brent says that Florida State University, they've done some outstanding research on racial bias and racial fear in law enforcement, in the law enforcement profession. And Brent, I don't know if that is coming from how that research, how police officers themselves have that racial bias and fear. Is that what he's probably getting at, Keith? Is that?
Yeah, he's saying research on racial bias and racial fear in law enforcement profession. So basically, the law enforcement profession having that bias and that fear
when they're dealing
with minorities. Yeah. So basically, and to the audience, if you want to know about Florida State, so there are programs, criminal justice programs that are amazing. But when the top ones are your Michigan State, Florida State, and I'm not saying in any order, Sam Houston State, University of Central Oklahoma. These are criminal research programs that do this. So yeah, Dr. Tharp, you're correct. Florida State has done that research, and they've done some amazing research on that. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, because again, I think that's it. All of this ties into even what we talked about last week with the psychological aspect of it. When you look at, are these things looked at during that process? Are these things able to be measured? Are racial bias and racial fear able to be measured doing those type of testing. And from talking with Dr. Campion, there are some tools that that profession can use to kind of pull out some of that information. And so,
But
go
you
ahead.
know what it can't. But you know the thing about it is when we're talking about either before this happens, so at the onset of going through the process of hiring, and we're talking about afterwards. The thing
Yeah.
about it is, how do you capture? There's no way to really capture during this situation. The body cam captures the actions,
Yeah.
but it doesn't capture the internal emotional components during that time. So we can speculate.
Yeah, and you're
You
right
know,
about that, Keith, because even when the last video we just saw, the officer shooting into a moving vehicle that had 5 people in it, what was going through, he said that he feared for his partner's life. And you kind of hear it in that clip where he said they were coming at you. Now the vehicle was backing out of this driveway from this residence. So that officer was not out in the middle of the street. He did not place himself in anywhere close to that vehicle for that officer to assume that his partner was going to be in danger.
well, that car was actually driving away.
It was, yeah.
It was actually driving away from the scene, so not toward, but from the scene.
From the scene, yeah.
Yeah.
So Keith, let's play this other clip that I have, and like I said, it's from a recent an incident that took place in Ohio, where a white officer shot and killed an unarmed black man, and he was found guilty. So this is something else we'll talk on the other side of this clip as to what may have led the jury to find this officer guilty.
Officer who is white is found guilty in the killing of an unarmed black man nearly 4 years ago. Adam Coy was convicted of murder, felonious assault, and reckless homicide in the shooting of Andre Hill. Prosecutors say Coy shot Hill as he came out of a garage in Columbus, Ohio. Hill was holding a cell phone in his hand. Coy's defense argued he thought Hill was holding a gun. Coy now faces life in prison. He is set to be sentenced on November 25th.
You know, once again, here's a person who's holding up a cell phone. Clearly, you can see that in the officer's body cam. You know, this took place in 2020. It took some 4 years for him to be convicted of that. But once again, Keith, these cases are being presented to jurors, and these jurors are looking at all of the facts. And when you have that evidence in front of you, where you see an officer saying that this person had a firearm, but they had a cell phone, what was the justification of shooting that person and killing that person?
Well, you know, I think it comes down to discretion. And there's some controversy, there's some discussions regarding discretion being controversial. But you know, it comes down to what did that officer think at that split second? What did he think? What did they believe they saw at that point? What have we been taught in the academy, man? The hands can hurt you. You know, the hands can hurt you. Objects in the hands can hurt you.
Mm-hmm.
So it comes down to what did that officer believe at that split second? Did that officer at that split second believe that he or a third party's life was in danger? And and that's why officers try to ask, well, what should I have done? That's a decision you have to make, but you have to utilize all of the escalation. You have to remember in every situation, escalation part of it, you got to be thinking about de-escalation too. And so what jurors and things are starting to look at, was there covering concealment? Was it the fact, did that officer rush to that scene without the appropriate backup, without the appropriate knowledge? Could that officer hidden behind that car? Could that officer had waited for negotiators? These are things that juries are looking at now. These are things that prosecutions are presenting in these cases. So they're looking at that. I believe juries are being educated more on this is what training is, because anytime a shooting occurs, the first thing they're going to do is look at your training records.
Mm-hmm.
Were you trained in de-escalation tactics? Were you trained in use of force tactics? These are things that that's not use of force anymore. It's response to resistance
Mm-hmm.
tactics. And so this is what's happening. People are being, and then now people know what questions to ask. When you see 8 or 9 of these things that are profiled by the media, on however many, on a regular basis, a year, whatever, people are paying close attention. They're sitting down with police chiefs. They're learning what the response to resistance protocols are. They're talking to other people. They're watching video, things like that, so they know what questions to ask.
Yeah.
So something that previous jurors may have missed, current jurors are educating themselves on these shootings. Whether or not they're going to be on the jury or not, they're reading, they're watching video, they're able to slow it down and things like that. So you're taking a risk that these individuals could be on that jury.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Keith, as we talk tonight about why are more police officers facing prosecution, one of the questions to you and to those who are watching and listening on our YouTube and Facebook and LinkedIn, do you think some of that may have to do with legal changes? Has there been changes made in some states that are making it more, I'm not going to say easy for prosecutors to bring these charges about? Does that have anything to do with it? The legal changes, there's increased scrutiny, and then also this gets to the prosecutors that they feel, because Keith, a lot of prosecutors will look at a case and say, is this something that I can get a conviction on? And if it's not something we can't get a conviction on, they're not going to move forward with it. And I think a lot of people don't understand that, and they may even talk to the family and say, well, this just doesn't, this happened, but we just don't think we can get a conviction. Because once you do try to get a conviction and you can't go back, double jeopardy is there. You can't. So I just wonder if there's more. We talked about the increased scrutiny, but other changes that have been made that are where we're seeing more officers being prosecuted.
Well, there's been those cases that I've questioned whether or not that officer should have even been charged. I mean, there's been those, and you don't, have there been officers, I think, that have been that have become scapegoats for a certain thing? Absolutely. We talk about that. You and I talk about that. I mean, it happens, and it's a shame that it happens. You should never try to build your career off off someone else's, back, especially when you're talking about someone's livelihood or someone's freedom. But I think the laws are the laws. I mean, every state has a murder statute, whether it's called murder, homicide, whatever. I mean, every state has that. And so now, it's just that it's causing, I believe, prosecutors to look and see every step that officer made. Was there any violation of this statute? And if there was, then we send it to the grand jury for an indictment. If it doesn't get an indictment, then we don't charge. If it gets an indictment, they charge and they go to trial.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think they are looking at more. I think and I'll tell you something else. There are more eyes on it and then what's happening also now, we forgot about this part. A lot of cities are taking investigations out of their homes or out of their laps, and they're having outside agencies come in and investigate.
Yeah.
So what I may have thought was not a crime as an investigator with with that respective department, the state police or state investigations bureau look at it and see it totally different. So it's always good to have a unbiased eye looking at it. A lot of departments are doing that. I wanted to do that in my last organization.
Yeah.
It got some pushback, but it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
It is it's the right thing to do. Even here in Memphis, Georgia Tennessee Bureau of Investigation takes the lead, or how our state police take the lead on a lot of these homicides, even in some of these larger cities.
Yeah.
And so I think what you have an extra other outside eyes looking at it, you got to look at that too. That can also play a part in someone being convicted, or at least going to trial.
Yeah. But Keith, I want to bring up two other incidents that happened. 2019, the death of Elijah McClain, the 23-year-old in Aurora, Colorado. Jurors recently found those paramedics, and I want two paramedics, and I want to say one police officer, guilty of Elijah McClain's death. And then up in Tacoma, there was an incident that happened in 2020 where Manuel Ellis, a 33-year-old black male, died in police custody after pleading that he could not breathe. Those officers were found not guilty, but then in another state, Colorado, you find where the jury convicted two paramedics and a police officer. So, and I think it leaves a lot of questions with people who people who are picked to be on jurors. What is that? Because people are wondering, okay, how could you find this officer not guilty, but then in this situation, a similar situation, that officer or paramedics are found guilty, just like what happened some years later in Minneapolis with the death of George Floyd, where
I think every state's different, and the statutes have different components to them in every state. So
yeah,
no state statutes are the same.
Yeah, you're right, and I think a lot of people in the public will look and kind of, if you don't fully understand that process, you're going to question the process, and you're going to question the jurors, why the jurors made that decision.
Right.
And Keith, and I think there's been certain cases where after the fact, the jury or a person serving on the jury wanted to go a different way, but they just ended up basically going along with the other jurors.
Well, Virgil, think about this too. And they ask, well, why did they go with a lower charge? Because the elements of murder may have not been there, but the elements of manslaughter may have been there.
Correct.
Which is a lower level components of it.
Yeah.
And so, and then, the audience, to our audience, you have to also remember, in a criminal case, it's beyond a reasonable doubt. So if you just have one bit of doubt, just one little hint of doubt, you can't convict someone. Yeah. So I think a lot of people don't understand that. What that means is beyond a reasonable doubt. If you have that doubt, you are told you can't say this person's guilty because you have a doubt. You in your mind did not think that this person is guilty, totally guilty. You feel like, they may have done something, but there's some doubt that they did it, so I can't. And I think a lot of people don't understand that.
And what was the intent? What was the intent of that officer when they took that person's life? Did they intend on taking that person's life?
Right.
Keith, I've got another video. I know I see there's a comment in the chat. I want to get to that, but this next video I want to show, it has gained a lot of attention around the country over the last couple of years. It's related to Breonna Taylor that took place, the officers in Louisville, where one of the main officers involved with that has been found guilty of civil rights violation. So I want to play this, and then on the other side of that, we'll get to the comment and we'll talk about this officer who was found guilty of Breonna Taylor, because that Breonna Taylor's shooting probably did not get as much attention as George Floyd, because there were just so many other things going on. But since her death, it has gained a lot of attention from the news media.
But Virgil,
Go
the
ahead.
reason that Breonna Taylor's death didn't get as much as George Floyd, because we didn't see Breonna Taylor's death
In front of
happen
us.
in front of us.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So Keith, let's get to this video, and then we'll get to the comment on the other side of after this video.
Time 1,694 days.
In front of a Kentucky courthouse, more than 4 years after Breonna Taylor's death, her grieving mom celebrates a guilty verdict.
Thank God that he covered 12 jurors who chose to do the right thing, who Breonna deserved justice.
This after a federal jury late Friday convicted now former Louisville police officer Brett Hankison of violating Taylor's civil rights during a botched drug raid in her apartment back in March 2020. Prosecutors arguing Hankison used excessive force, blindly firing 10 shots, hitting a glass door and window, but no people. The jury clearing the 48-year-old of violating the rights of Taylor's neighbors. NBC News reached out to Hankison's attorneys for comment, but received no response.
Who was shooting at us?
It was her house.
Police said the raid was targeting Taylor's ex-boyfriend who lived at a different address. Her then-boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, seen here on body camera video, later said he fired at officers, believing they were intruders. A grand jury voted not to indict the officers who fired back, striking Taylor.
Say her name.
Breonna Taylor.
The 26-year-old's death helped fuel the racial justice protests of 2020. Years later, the daughter of Martin Luther King Jr. calling this conviction a long-awaited moment of accountability, with Hankison set to be sentenced in March. Maggie Vespa, NBC News.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.
You know, Keith, what stuck out to me when listening to the mother speak, I think she said this has been 1,069 days or something, almost 4 years that the death of Breonna Taylor happened. In the fact that, you know, it took this a jury to find this officer guilty of violating her civil rights, not for murder, but violating her civil rights. You know, and Keith, it again, from 2019, 2020, 21, there was a lot of officer involved shootings that took the death of a lot of unarmed Black men and women. And just as I'm sitting here and watching this, Keith, it just kind of dawned that in that 2-year period of time, there were a lot of these type of incidents that took place in a very short period of time, because you had Breonna Taylor, you had George Floyd, you had the incident that took place in Aurora, Colorado with Elijah McClain, and so many others that, golly, we can't even right now remember unless they're in front of us. So, you know, but once again, Keith, these jurors are looking at the evidence and coming back with decisions that, even though it may take 4 years, but they're coming back with decisions to hold these officers accountable.
Well, it took 4 years for the federal trial. The criminal trial took place about a year and a half, about 2 years ago, but it took that 4 years for it to go federal.
Yeah.
And in the Breonna Taylor situation.
Yeah. Well, Keith, I want to get to the comment in the chat from Brent on LinkedIn. He said, I believe part of it can be that the Gen X is the latest generation that will take the unethical behavior that comes from our profession. We, the older generation, stay quiet on a lot of things that happen between the profession and the society. Probably right, Keith. I mean, I think there's a generation gap there.
Generation X is the Y.
Yeah,
they're the Y. They're the Y. You know, Y generation. You know, explain it. That's a generation that you and I, you know, our children. You know, we were raised that you didn't ask questions, especially from adults.
Yeah,
you did as adults say it. You know, do. So if an adult said this, especially when it came to law enforcement officers, teachers, you never questioned. This is the generation that it's not questioning; they want answers.
Even if there's an officer standing in front of them with a firearm pointed at them, they're going to argue and say, "Why should I put my hands up?"
They're going to inquire. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, and they're going to push that. They're going to push that needle. They're going to, because this generation, like you said, why should I do what you're asking me to do?
Well,
I didn't do anything wrong.
Well, why are you doing that? And I haven't done anything wrong. And you're right. If they, because if they believe that the Generation X and millennials, if they believe that they haven't done anything wrong, they want to prove that. They want to. They want to prove I haven't done anything wrong. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about why you think I've done something. And sometimes it's not the right. When an officer's, it's not the right time. But
because you've always said you're not going to win that.
You're not going to win court.
You're not going to win court there. You may win court inside of the courtroom, but outside the courtroom, that officer has that authority.
Right.
Don't want and often in this generation has seen officers abuse that authority, and they're very vocal about that. And so again, Brent, you're right. You're spot on when you talk about the Generation X.
Well, Dr. Tharp, we're that generation. Chief Green and I are that generation that nothing's going to happen to him anyway. Nothing's going to happen to the officer. Why do I complain? Why say anything? The Generation X and the millennials are, I'm going to report it. I'm going to report it because I feel as though this officer was rude. I feel as though they have overstepped their boundaries, and I'm going to report it.
Keith, as we're coming up on the last few minutes of the podcast, and as we're talking about the Generation X, I just want to even go back to what, we were born in the civil rights era. You had, and I'm going to ask this to you, and then we've got, Dr. Tharp, who was on LinkedIn watching. During that era, we saw a lot of young Black men and young Black women who stood up and basically said, I'm not going to do what you're telling me to do. And so there was a generation that as we came into the civil rights era that stood up to police and said, no, I'm not going to sit down on the curb. No, I'm not going to do X, Y, and Z. But that was met with a lot of force.
Oh yeah. It was met with violence. Some people lost their life. Many people lost their lives. And so I think when you do have that kind of force being utilized, and especially during that time, I think it does get to the point of, well, why? Why am I going to, nothing's going to be done? Because they did see police officers abuse and murder Black men, Black women, and others that were standing up for civil rights, and nothing happened.
Nothing happened to them.
And so it was I believe it was frustrating, and it became frustration for our generation. I think now the generation now is, hey, listen, I saw and I've heard the stories. That's not going to happen to us. We're going to tell.
Yeah,
we're going to get justice.
Yeah. Well, Keith, do you remember watching the movie Mississippi Burning?
Absolutely.
Where the young man stood up and talked to the FBI, and he wasn't afraid. And he stood up. And I think that there's a generation that we come up, as we were coming up, that were very firm on they had rights, but those rights were being violated. Now we've got the Generation X and others who are basically saying, you all have been doing this for a very long time. We're not going to just stand down and not say anything. Obviously, you may not like me questioning you, but you're going to have to explain to me why you want to take me to jail or whatever. And so, again, is that the right thing to do? You know, we'll always say you're not going to win that outside of the courtroom. But also, Keith, you've got a generation of men and women who are coming into this profession who are a part of that Gen X generation.
Well, that's the hope I have. That gives me hope for the profession, because you do have that group that is coming in that's asking questions and basically saying, I'm going to intervene. I'm hoping that that's the case. But first, you said something before we go. You said something really interesting, and I wanted to respond to this. What we're seeing now also is a backlash from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. People say, well, what do you mean by that? What I mean is that the reporting of excessive force from police officers against communities of color has always been known to occur.
Mm-hmm.
It's been reported, but as we said earlier, nothing had ever been done. It was always, well, the officer was justified, or no one would come forward, or things like that. So now what's happening, where we're seeing more of this, you know, the convictions, and we're seeing more people getting involved, is because the body cameras and the phone footage is confirming what minorities have said for years.
Yeah.
And so now it is, we've been saying you do this, you didn't believe us, you didn't take us seriously. Here's the footage. Now maybe you'll believe us now.
Yeah. Well,
that's what we're seeing.
Yeah. Well, and Dr. Thorpe just put another comment in the chat where he says, you know, no repercussions for the officers because the courts were all white. Now we're seeing a different makeup of jurors. This is more. It depends on where you're at, Keith. That this is more of a jury of your peers, not a jury that's not of your peers. Because as we saw in the 60s and 70s, you didn't find any black jurors on those jurors. But now you're seeing a different, a much more demographic of people being on these jurors from different ages. And so, and I think, you know, as we talked about tonight's topic, you know, why are more police officers facing prosecution? There's many different things that is playing into why prosecutors are taking these cases before jurors, and jurors are looking at all the evidence and coming up and making these decisions that are holding these officers accountable. Because at the end of the day, Keith, this is all about accountability. So yeah.
Well, forensics and all that play a big role in it also.
Yeah. I mean, technology has definitely come a long way. I mean, we didn't have body cameras 30 years ago. You know, we didn't have the type of technology. All of that has definitely helped with these cases that are being presented to jurors. So, yeah. Hey, brother, it's been, once again, man, it's been great, you know, to come together and talk about another topic that involves policing in America. You know, we come together every Thursday to have these conversations about policing in America. And tonight we talked about why are more police officers facing prosecution. And, you know, Keith, I want to say thanks to everybody who tuned in on our YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, for your comments, your in the chat. Once again, it's just been another great topic. And I keep going back to how these topics are tying back into what we talked about last week with Dr. Campion, that psychological piece of it. So yeah. So, man, you know, we will do this all over again next Thursday. Make sure you're on time. That's all I got to say, brother.
You talking about me?
Yeah.
Okay, you're absolutely right, man. I'm not gonna argue with you, my man.
All right, man. Well, hey, brother, it's always good. And again, thank you, everybody. And hey, if you missed any parts of this podcast, you can definitely check out this rebroadcast on our Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts. And also, if you're a first-time listener, go to our website, www.youandthelawpodcast.com. That's www.youandthelawpodcast.com. You'll find out more about Chief Swaggy One. You'll find out more about our podcast, and you will find all of our social media links there. So again, and also, Keith, I got to remind everybody, please continue to go to our Facebook page, follow us, like us. And we want to thank everybody who continues to do that. But and then also go to our YouTube. That's very important. Go to our YouTube, subscribe to us, and follow us on there. But brother, we'll get together next Thursday right here at 6 p.m. For another informative topic on You and the Law podcast. Have a good night.